My name is Eleanor Price. I'm 55 years old, and for most of my life, I've worked behind the steam tables in a hospital cafeteria. I never thought I needed much, just enough to pay rent, keep the lights on, and put a hot meal on the table for my kids. But that night, at my own dinner table, I realized I had become the punchline of my family's jokes. It was supposed to be a quiet Sunday meal, the kind I used to dream would keep us close. I had cooked fried chicken, mashed potatoes, collard greens, the same way my mother once cooked for me. My daughter Lauren pushed her plate back, laughing at something her boyfriend had whispered. "Mom's little dream," she said loud enough for everyone to hear. "What are you going to call it? The Still Broke Cafe?" The table erupted in laughter. My son Caleb chimed in, shaking his head as if the idea of me running a restaurant was the most ridiculous thing he'd ever heard. I felt the sting burn in my chest, but I didn't argue. I just sat there, staring at the food I had made with hands that were still sore from 12-hour shifts at the hospital. For a moment, the sound of their laughter seemed to fade, and all I could hear was the beating of my own heart, heavy and furious. I wanted to shout, to defend myself. But instead, I set my fork down and folded my hands in my lap. Something shifted inside me, quiet but fierce. If they saw me as a joke, then I would make sure they lived long enough to choke on their own words. That night, while the house slept, I pulled out an old box from the closet. Inside was my mother's recipe binder, its pages stained with grease and thyme, filled with the flavors that had carried us through poverty and loss. I traced my fingers over her handwriting and whispered to myself, "If this is all I have, then this is where I'll start." And so I did. The morning after that dinner, I woke up with the taste of humiliation still bitter in my mouth. I walked through my small house in silence, looking at the things I had held onto for years: an old television, a treadmill no one used anymore, a cabinet of dishes that only gathered dust. By noon, I had listed nearly everything I owned online. I told myself if my kids thought I was poor, then let me be poor for a reason, because I had invested every last thing into something worth building. A week later, I stood outside a shuttered diner on the edge of town. Its sign still read, "Harper's Diner." Letters faded and chipped. The windows were greasy with dust, and inside I could see booths with torn vinyl seats and a counter coated in grime. To anyone else, it looked like a graveyard of failed dreams. To me, it looked like a chance to prove that I wasn't finished yet. I signed the lease with trembling hands, every stroke of the pen reminding me of the risk. The first days were brutal. I scrubbed the floors until my knees ached, pulled out rusted equipment, and scraped grease off the walls that had been there since the 70s. The smell of spoiled oil clung to my clothes, even after long showers. I burned through my savings faster than I expected. New light fixtures, plumbing repairs, gallons of cleaning solution. At night, I collapsed onto my mattress, wondering if I had made the biggest mistake of my life. Then came the health inspection. I stood by the door, my apron already damp with sweat, as the inspector pointed at the cracked tiles in the kitchen, the outdated refrigerator, the ceiling vent clogged with grease. "You'll have to fix all of this before you can open," he said, handing me a report filled with red marks. When he left, I sat alone on the counter and cried for the first time in years. I thought about quitting that night. I imagined telling my kids they were right, that I had no business dreaming at my age. But then I looked at my mother's recipe binder on the counter, its pages curling with age. She had raised 4 children through hard times, never once giving up, never once letting pride stop her from trying. I pressed my palm against her handwriting, and the shame in my chest turned into something steadier, something that felt like courage. The next morning, I drove to the hardware store and bought tiles on clearance. I borrowed a ladder from my neighbor and spent hours fixing the vent with hands that shook but refused to stop. I patched the ceiling, painted the walls, and hauled out the broken fridge. It took me 3 more weeks, but when the inspector returned, he nodded. "You're cleared," he said, stamping the form. My knees nearly gave out beneath me, but this time it wasn't from exhaustion, it was relief. With that stamp, the diner was no longer just a dream. It was a real place, with clean walls, working equipment, and a future that belonged to me. I hung a chalkboard on the front window and wrote in shaky letters, "Opening soon." That night, I locked up and stood on the sidewalk, staring at the flickering neon sign that still carried the old diner's name. I knew I would need a new one, but I didn't have the money yet. All I had was the key in my hand and a stubborn fire in my chest. For the first time in years, I felt taller than my own shadow. I whispered to myself as I turned the lock, "If they think I can't, I'll show them I can." And when I flipped that key and heard the deadbolt click, I realized the next time I opened this door, it wouldn't just be to a diner. It would be to the start of a fight for my own dignity. The day of my soft opening arrived faster than I expected. I had spent weeks patching up that diner, painting the walls in warm yellows, scrubbing the booths until they almost looked new, and chalking out a menu board with shaky hands. I didn't know if anyone would come. I had no money for advertising, no staff to speak of, only a pocket of hope and a binder full of recipes. I had just turned the sign to open when I heard the bell above the door. Standing there was Naomi Johnson, my old high school friend. We hadn't seen each other in years, but she had become something of a local voice, a food blogger who people trusted. She walked in with a wide smile and said, "Ellie, I heard you were crazy enough to open a place, so I had to come see it for myself." I laughed nervously as I set a plate of gumbo in front of her, the same gumbo my mother used to make when the pantry was nearly bare. Naomi took one bite, and I saw her eyes light up. "This tastes like home," she whispered. By the time she left, she'd taken pictures of the food, the chalkboard menu, even me holding my mother's binder. That night, she posted it all on her page with the caption, "Revival cooking in a forgotten corner of town. Go taste it before the world catches on." The next morning, I walked into the diner to find a line out the door. Strangers filled the booths, the smell of fried catfish and cornbread drifting into the street. I scrambled behind the counter, cooking faster than I ever had in my life, pouring sweet tea, serving peach cobbler. My hands shook from exhaustion, but my heart pounded with a joy I hadn't felt in decades. People were eating my food and paying for it. Word spread quickly. Within a week, the diner was packed every evening. One afternoon, the door swung open and there stood Lauren, my daughter, her eyes scanning the crowd with something like surprise. She walked up to the counter and said, "Need help, Mom?" Her tone was cautious, but I could hear the curiosity under her words. That evening, Caleb showed up too, carrying boxes of supplies, offering to stock shelves. At first, I hesitated. These were the same kids who had laughed at me, who had called my dream a joke. But with dishes piling high and orders coming faster than I could fill them, I swallowed my pride. "Fine," I told them. "If you're here to work, then work." And they did. Lauren handled the social media pages, posting pictures of customers smiling with plates of fried chicken. Caleb ran errands, fixed the leaky sink, and helped mop the floors. For a while, it felt like the family I had always wanted. We moved around each other in the kitchen with a rhythm I didn't know we could have. Customers praised the food, the service, the warmth of the place. One man pressed my hand and said, "This diner reminds me of my mama's cooking. Don't you ever close it down?" I carried his words like armor. but success has a way of making people bold. Lauren began talking about branding, about expansion, about how we could go bigger. Caleb bragged about the connections he had with suppliers. They were hungry in a way that made me uneasy. I wanted steady, reliable growth. They wanted fast money, recognition, and control. One night after closing, I sat at the counter with a mug of coffee, staring at the receipts. We had cleared more in 2 weeks than I made in a month at the hospital. My kids sat across from me, grinning, their energy electric. Lauren leaned forward and said, "See, Mom, this is what I told you all along. You just needed us to make it real." Her words stung. I knew she meant them as praise, but something about the way she said it made me feel like a guest in my own kitchen. I smiled weakly, pushed the receipts aside, and told them it was late. But as I wiped down the counter after they left, I couldn't shake the feeling that a shadow had entered my diner, a shadow that would only grow darker. At first, I told myself I was imagining things. The diner was busier than I ever dreamed. Customers lined up before opening, and the register clinked with bills I had never seen pile so high. Still, small details began to gnaw at me. A regular named Mrs. Green mentioned that she had ordered online and been charged nearly double what she usually paid. Confused, I checked my order sheets. There was no record of her order. That night, after everyone left, I sat in front of the old desktop computer in the office. My fingers trembled as I searched for my diner's name online. To my shock, another site popped up, Pour No More Kitchen, with the same photos, the same menu, even the same gumbo I had served Naomi on that first day. Only the contact information was different. The phone number didn't belong to me. The payment link directed to an account under my daughter's name. I felt the blood drain from my face. I clicked through page after page, finding flyers, coupon codes, even social media ads, all polished, all branded with a name I had never approved. The logo was a cartoon of a steaming bowl, cheerful and colorful, so different from the chalkboard simplicity I had chosen. But there was no mistaking it. My children had built a shadow version of my diner. I confronted them the next evening after closing. Lauren was wiping down tables while Caleb stacked boxes in the pantry. I held out a printout of the website. "What is this?" I demanded. Lauren froze. Caleb kept moving, his jaw tightening. "It's just marketing," Lauren said finally, her tone too calm, too rehearsed. "We thought the name Pour No More sounded catchy. You know, people love a comeback story. You opened accounts in your names. You took orders behind my back. You stole from me," I said, my voice breaking. Caleb slammed a box down, the sound echoing through the diner. "You wouldn't even have this place if it weren't for us. We made it real. You're welcome." The words cut deeper than I thought possible. My hands shook, not from fear, but from rage. "Get out," I whispered. Lauren's eyes widened. "Mom, don't be dramatic. We're family. We're in this together." "No," I said, louder this time, my voice cracking through the silence of the kitchen. "You betrayed me. You used my name, my recipes, and you tried to turn it into yours. Pack up and go. You're fired." For a moment, none of us moved. The air felt heavy, thick with all the years of love and resentment we had carried. Then Caleb muttered something under his breath and stormed out, the door slamming behind him. Lauren lingered, her face pale, her lips trembling as if she wanted to argue. But finally, she grabbed her purse and left without another word. I locked the door behind them and collapsed onto a chair. The diner, once full of laughter and the clatter of dishes, was silent. The neon sign buzzed faintly outside, casting a sickly light over the empty booths. I had dreamed of building a family business, and now I sat in the ruins of that dream, alone. The following week brought even more blows. A letter arrived from an attorney representing Pour No More Kitchen. My own children had filed paperwork for a limited liability company, claiming rights to the brand. They accused me of infringing on their trademark. Suppliers who had been dealing with Caleb refused to fill my orders, citing unpaid invoices. Health inspectors returned, responding to anonymous complaints about violations that didn't exist. I had no proof, but I knew where those calls came from. With no supplies, no staff, and no clear legal standing, I had no choice but to close the diner. On the last night, I stood behind the counter and turned the open sign to closed. My reflection stared back at me in the glass, an older woman with tired eyes, her apron stained and her spirit cracked. For all my effort, all my sacrifice, I had ended up right where my children had said I belonged, with nothing. I spent the next few days in a haze, barely leaving my house. The silence pressed in on me. I avoided neighbors, ignored phone calls, and couldn't bear to open the recipe binder at night. I lay awake wondering if I had been foolish all along. Maybe they were right. Maybe I was just a cafeteria worker playing pretend. One night, I returned to the diner to pick up some papers I had left behind. The place smelled of stale grease and despair. I sat at the counter in the dark, the only sound the hum of the refrigerator that still worked. For the first time, I let the thought enter my mind. Maybe it was over. Maybe I would never cook for anyone but myself again. Tears blurred my vision as I whispered into the emptiness, "Mama, I tried. I really tried." And that's when I heard the door open, footsteps echoing on the tile. A familiar voice called out, firm but gentle, "Ellie, don't you dare quit now." It was Naomi. Naomi's voice cut through the stale silence of the diner, firm but kind. "Ellie, you're not done. Not yet." I lifted my head from the counter where I had been slumped for hours. Papers were scattered like a crime scene, letters from lawyers, unpaid bills, notes I had scribbled in desperation. My apron was stiff with grease, my hands trembling from days of exhaustion and grief. "It's over," I whispered. They took the name, the vendors, even the customers. I don't have the strength to fight anymore. Naomi set a brown envelope on the counter, pushing it toward me until it touched my arm. "You still have the food, Ellie. That's what matters. People lined up for your gumbo. Not a catchy slogan. This covers a month's rent. Use it." Tears burned my eyes. "Naomi, I can't pay you back. I can't let you throw money into a sinking ship." "You don't owe me anything," she said simply. "What you owe is to yourself and to the people who believe in you. Don't bury yourself alive." Her words hit deeper than the betrayal of my children. I opened the envelope and saw the check, my vision blurring, a tiny ember of hope. One I thought had gone cold flickered inside my chest. The next morning, I stripped away the past. The cracked Harper's Diner sign came down. The chalkboard menu I once loved leaned against the wall, silent. With each stroke of fresh paint, the space smelled less like failure and more like possibility. On a simple canvas banner, I wrote the name that had been burning inside me: Mama Ellie's Revival Kitchen. Revival wasn't a brand, it was a promise to myself. This time I moved with caution and certainty. I hired a lawyer to file the trademark under my name, line by line, no loopholes for anyone to twist. I learned how to guard my work. I met with new suppliers, small farmers, independent bakers, people willing to give me a chance because they had tasted my food before. Naomi wrote about the comeback, urging folks to show up. On the morning of the reopening, I stepped outside and froze. The line stretched around the block. Families in coats, truckers with steaming coffee mugs, church ladies in wide hats, all waiting for me. The smell of cornbread and catfish drifted into the air as people clapped. When I cut the ribbon, I felt my mother's spirit steadying my hands. Inside, the diner glowed as if reborn. Naomi had found an old jukebox that hummed with soul music. The booths were full, the chatter loud, the air thick with the scent of hot gumbo. Customers shook my hand, telling me, "This place feels like home. Don't you ever close it again." Every word stitched my heart back together. 2 weeks later, I heard the bell jingle again, and my breath caught. Lauren and Caleb walked in. No swagger this time, no smirks. They looked like children walking into the principal's office, uncertain, nervous. My daughter clutched an envelope. She slid it across the counter. "Resumes?" she said softly. I stared at them, my mind a storm. I remembered the laughter at the dinner table when they mocked me, the website they created behind my back, the attorney's letter accusing me of stealing my own recipes. But I also remembered sleepless nights holding them as babies, their tiny fingers wrapped around mine. My anger and love collided, leaving me standing on shaking ground. Finally, I spoke. "If you want back in, it won't be as family. It will be as employees, with contracts, with rules." Lauren's eyes filled with tears. Caleb's shoulders dropped. "We'll take it," he muttered, almost relieved. I hired a lawyer again, drafted 90-day probation periods, wages, responsibilities, everything spelled out. No shortcuts, no family exceptions. They signed without complaint. For the first time, I saw something in their eyes I hadn't seen before: respect. The diner grew stronger with each passing month. Naomi's stories went viral. Folks drove hours just to taste the food. Revenue passed $100,000 in 6 months, a number that once felt impossible. But the real treasure wasn't money. It was the community table I introduced every Saturday night. It was a long wooden table near the window where anyone who was hungry could sit without shame. Veterans with haunted eyes, widows who missed the sound of voices, teenagers who needed a safe place. They all came. I ladled gumbo into their bowls, placed cornbread on their plates, and watched as strangers became neighbors. The laughter that rose from that table healed something inside me no amount of revenue ever could. Sometimes Lauren poured the sweet tea there, her smile tentative but real. Sometimes Caleb bussed their trays, quieter, more humble than I'd ever seen him. They were still learning, and so was I. Forgiveness didn't come easy, but it came with conditions. That was the difference now. I had boundaries, and they had to respect them. One evening, as the last customer left, I stepped outside under the glow of the new sign. The street was quiet, the neon letters shining against the dark. I thought of the night I almost gave up, whispering to my mother that I had failed. And I thought of this night, standing firm, my diner alive, my dignity restored. I turned the lock, loosened the apron strings, and whispered into the stillness, "Mama, I made it, and I'm not going anywhere." Thank you for watching. If you enjoy these family, drama, and revenge stories, please subscribe and join me for more every day.